All right, let's talk about implementing an input component. So look at this input component here. This input component is a special kind of input component because it contains a button. But not every input component is supposed to have a button, right? So in this lesson, we're going to implement a basic input component. Once it's ready, then in the next lesson, we'll combine it with a button to get this look. Also, this input component has a shadow around it. That's why its background looks white, but the rest of the page looks really light gray. The page is actually white. The reason we have some gray here is because of the shadow that is spilled around this input component. But once again, we don't want to add this shadow to every input component because that's going to make our page messy. Imagine a form with 5 input components, each having a shadow around it. So in our basic implementation, we just want to add a border. Then we'll customize that input component for this part of the page. So back to our markup, let's add an input of type text and give it a class of input. Now, back to our style sheet, let's define a new section called inputs. And here we define a new rule. What property is doing it here? Well, I'm going to apply a padding of 1.5 rems and 3.5 rems, a border of 1 pixel solid CCC, which is a really light gray. Then I'm going to give it a border radius of 30 pixels, so we get round corners. Now let's save the changes and see what we get up to this point. All right, here's what we get. That looks pretty decent. Now, I don't like this blue border that Chrome adds. This is called the outline. To get rid of this, we simply set the outline property to 0. Now, the border is gone. Great. Now, what if we type something here? By default, the text is black, but I want to change this to the same color we use for our headings. So we set the color to color headings. That's better. Now in this design, we have this placeholder here. So let's add it to our markup. So placeholder, we set it to enter domain name here. Now take a look. There are a couple of issues here. First, the text is a little bit larger than what we had in our design, and also it's darker. How can we change the color of the placeholder? Well, we have a special pseudo element selector for it. That is :placeholder. Here we're going to set the color to CD, CB, D7. Now, take a look. That is better. Now, the next problem is the font size. In this design, the font used here is Inter Light 20 pixels. Now, let's inspect this element and find the font size here. So we go to the Computer tab and look at the font size. That is 24 pixels. And as you can see, this is coming from normalized CSS. We don't want that. So back to our rule, let's set the font size to 2 rems. Now we have so many properties, so let's sort them all. That is better. Good. All right, here's what we get. I think that looks pretty decent. Now, if you look at the desktop version, you can see the font size here is 15 pixels. So the last thing we want to do here is defining a media query for wider screens. And here we're going to set the font size for inputs to 1.5 rems. So here's the mobile version. Now let's look at the desktop version. Okay, great. So our input component is ready. Next, I'm going to show you how to combine it with the button.